Hey friends, it's Jimmy here, welcoming you to episode 248 of this mystery series where we discuss all things unsolved. With that said, don't forget to hit the notification bell and turn on all notifications and drop a quick comment saying where you're listening from. Or if you don't want to do that, just leave a quick comment saying I'm doing my part, just like the meme. Imagine a brilliant physicist spoken of in the same breath as Galileo and Newton, stepping onto a ship one evening and vanishing without a trace. This is exactly what happened in 1938 when Ettore Majorana, a prodigious Italian scientist, disappeared under eerie circumstances. But this isn't your usual missing person case, and it turns out that there's very good evidence to suggest he actually lived his life out half a world away. Ettore Majorana was born in Catania, Sicily, on August 5, 1906, into a well-off family of intellectuals. From a young age, he showed exceptional, and perhaps even prodigious, mathematical talent. He initially pursued engineering at university, likely due to his father's influence, but ultimately switched to physics, where he fell into the circle of legendary physicist Enrico Fermi. Majorana quickly stood out even among these bright minds, astonishing peers and mentors with elegant solutions to tough problems. His contributions to theoretical physics were profound, though he had little interest in publishing papers. He tackled quantum theory and subatomic particles, and he even anticipated the existence of the neutron before it was officially discovered. Majorana's modesty and reluctance to publish meant he only authored 9 scientific papers in his life, but those few works left an enduring legacy. Despite, or perhaps because of, his brilliance, Majorana became increasingly reclusive and troubled in the mid-1930s. After a fruitful period working with renowned physicists like Werner Heisenberg in Germany and Niels Bohr in Copenhagen, Majorana returned to Italy with a growing sense of isolation. He saw his own work as trivial and was often reluctant to share his breakthroughs. Friends and colleagues noted that he withdrew from social life. For several years, he largely shut himself away, avoiding even close family and friends. In late 1937, however, he took a post as a full professor of theoretical physics at the University of Naples, an extraordinary appointment for a 31-year-old. This role brought him out of isolation briefly, as he began teaching in early 1938. Yet, those around him could see he was not at ease. Majorana was devoutly Catholic and prone to what have been called mystical crises, and he seemed burdened by internal conflicts. These personal struggles, which may be viewed as bouts of acute mental illness, foreshadowed the dramatic steps he would soon take. In late March 1938, Majorana's inner turmoil came to a head. Without warning, he withdrew all the money from his bank account and even collected back pay he had never bothered to pick up, signs that he was putting his affairs in order. On March 25, 1938, Majorana left Naples, likely aboard the steamer Città di Palermo, bound for Sicily. Before departing, he penned a cryptic letter to his colleague and friend Antonio Carelli, the director of the Naples Physics Institute. In this note, Majorana stated he had made an unavoidable decision and apologized for the trouble his sudden disappearance would cause. He asked Carelli to remember him kindly to colleagues and students, hinting that by the time the letter was read, he might already be gone. This sounded ominously like a farewell. Yet the very same evening, Majorana sent a follow-up telegram from Palermo in Sicily that baffled everyone. It said that the sea had quote-unquote rejected him and that he'd be heading back tomorrow. This dramatic phrase suggested that Majorana had a serious change of heart. Some interpret it to mean he might have tried eliminating himself by jumping into the sea during the voyage, but then survived or reconsidered. True to his word, he appeared to purchase a return ticket and may have boarded a ship back to Naples on March 26th. In fact, There were unconfirmed reports that colleagues saw him on the Naples-bound boat or back in Naples shortly thereafter. However, after that point, Ettore Majorana was never seen again in the official record. When he failed to reappear, his family and friends panicked. Majorana's disappearance was reported to the authorities, and an intensive search was launched both in Sicily and on the Italian mainland. The news that such a famed physicist had vanished triggered a massive response. Majorana's family, colleagues, and the Italian police undertook a frantic search, scouring passenger lists, ports, and coastlines for any trace of him. Even Majorana's mentor Enrico Fermi intervened at the highest levels. Fermi, who deeply appreciated Majorana's unique genius, reportedly told his wife that if Ettore had decided to disappear, he was clever enough that no one would ever find him. Notably, this statement has later been interpreted as indicating that Fermi may have known more than he was letting on, as you'll see shortly. Despite this grim acknowledgement of Majorana's cunning, Fermi was determined to try. He even appealed to Italy's leader Benito Mussolini to dedicate government resources to finding the missing scientist. Convincing Mussolini that this was a matter of national security, an extensive manhunt ensued. Ships and hospitals were checked, and the Italian Navy combed the sea routes, but nothing concrete emerged. The only clues left behind were Majorana's haunting letters. In his hotel room in Naples, a short note addressed to his family was found. It told them not to mourn him in traditional black clothing, perhaps signifying that he had simply disappeared and wasn't actually deceased. Over the ensuing decades, numerous theories emerged to explain what might have happened to the vanishing genius. One popular idea is that Majorana foresaw the destructive power of nuclear physics and chose to disappear to avoid any role in it. While Majorana's colleagues like Fermi did go on to work on the Manhattan Project, there's no direct evidence that Majorana himself voiced such fears before he vanished. Still, the timing and his brilliance make this theory enticing, a genius fleeing the future he predicted. Over the years, there were numerous reported sightings of Majorana in places like Argentina and Venezuela. Some hypothesized that he secretly fled Italy, possibly motivated by guilt or a desire to live anonymously far from the looming conflict in Europe. In fact, in the 1950s, an Italian television claimed to have tracked him down to Venezuela, where he was living a simple life under an assumed identity. The only problem with this theory, though, is that they decided to continue to let him live his life of quiet anonymity. Some have speculated that the producers could have simply made up this narrative for a television series, given the popularity of the case in Italy. That said, of course, it's also possible that they did track him down, and that they chose to respect his wishes. I'll come back to this theory in a moment, though, since there was a recent explosive development relating to that Italian documentary. Others, of course, believe that Majorana may have simply ended his own life, though this theory has been hotly contested. Majorana's devout Catholic faith and the absence of a body, as well as the note telling his family not to mourn in black, are all factors against this. Further, there's also the fact that he appears to have rejected the idea of ending himself when he came back from Sicily. A theory favored by Majorana's own family was that he suffered a spiritual or existential crisis and retreated to a monastery in Italy. Given his religious devotion, they speculated he might have chosen a life of seclusion and contemplation over fame. Indeed, his priest and confessor hinted that Ettore had experienced deep mystical episodes and may have had other plans for his life. Naturally, though, this priest couldn't come out and say what happened even if he knew what did, so long as the context of what was said was during confession. This theory portrays Majorana's disappearance almost as a deliberate act of spiritual exile, mirroring the idea of the more physical self-exile from Italy. Like with Fermi, the fact that his confessor gave this cryptic statement has been viewed as somewhat unusual in light of subsequent happenings. There were even darker speculations that Majorana might have been kidnapped or killed because of the sensitive knowledge he possessed. Some wondered if agents of a foreign power, or even shadowy elements within Italy, abducted him to prevent his intellect from aiding another country's atomic projects. Given that Majorana would have almost certainly been working on the Manhattan Project if he had followed Fermi to America, this idea has gathered a lot of steam. That said, while it may be interesting to speculate about, there's no evidence whatsoever to suggest this was the case. Remarkably, the case saw a revival in the 21st century when new clues emerged. In 2011, an elderly witness came forward in Italy claiming not only to have seen Majorana alive in the late 1940s, but even to have befriended him in Buenos Aires. This prompted the Rome Attorney's Office to officially reopen the investigation 73 years after Majorana vanished. Soon, a photograph surfaced, allegedly showing Majorana, under the name Mr. Beanie, living in Valencia in Venezuela in 1955. Forensic analysts compared this photo with images of Majorana and found a number of striking similarities in facial features. Also, if you're one of those people who just listens, this may be a good time to take a look and see if you can see the resemblance between the two men. Adding to the intrigue, reports emerged of a postcard written by Majorana's uncle that was purportedly found among the belongings of this mysterious individual. These pieces of evidence strongly suggested that Majorana had survived and lived in South America under an assumed identity. Following these developments, Italian authorities announced an official conclusion. In February 2015, the Rome Attorney's Office declared that he likely lived abroad in Venezuela, at least from 1955 to 1959. No criminal act was identified. In other words, the investigation found that Majorana likely chose to remove himself from his former life. With that statement, the decades-old case was closed from a legal standpoint. It's an astonishing outcome. After so many years of uncertainty, the authorities essentially concluded that the genius physicist quietly lived out his life in obscurity. The official verdict has not put an end to the fascination with Majorana's story. Even if he did live incognito in Venezuela, many unanswered questions remain. Why would a scientist of Majorana's caliber abandon a promising career and family to live in hiding? Was he truly driven by a moral objection to nuclear weapons, overwhelming anxiety, or something else we may never understand? It's also unknown what ultimately became of him after 1959. If he lived longer, he appears to have kept an exceedingly low profile. In 2025, nearly 87 years after he vanished, an Italian court finally declared Ettore Majorana presumed dead, providing legal closure to his status. It was a routine spring afternoon on a quiet country road in Texas, when a mother stopped her pickup truck to drop off her two young daughters. Moments later, one of them, a 2-year-old girl named Desiree Carroll, vanished into thin air. In March 1983, 2-year-old Desiree was living with her mother, Anne Elizabeth Carroll, and 5-year-old sister, Heather, in a rural area near the small town of Cost, Texas. They had moved into a house owned by Anne's boyfriend, David Morris. Desiree's parents were divorced. Anne had custody, but her ex-husband Reggie still visited the girls regularly. On March 25, 1983, Anne set out on an errand in nearby Marlin and left her daughters at the start of the long dirt driveway leading up to their home. Heather was able to walk to the house on her own, and Desiree was supposed to follow. But as Anne's pickup truck pulled away, Desiree tried to chase after it instead of going with her sister. That was the last time anyone saw her. When Anne returned later that day, Desiree was nowhere to be found, and a frantic search began. Authorities and volunteers immediately mobilized to scour the area for the missing toddler. Hundreds of people from several counties combed the woods around the Carroll home, aided by law enforcement and even National Guard units. They searched tirelessly on foot and by air. At one point, heavy rain drenched the area, hindering the volunteers and possibly washing away any tracks or clues. Even with a full week of effort, not a single piece of evidence was found. Not a footprint, not a scrap of clothing. Baffled local authorities even called in help from the Texas Rangers and the FBI as days passed with no sign of the child. With no leads from the search, investigators turned a wary eye toward those closest to the child. About a week after the disappearance, the Limestone County Sheriff held a meeting with other officers to share notes and observations. They found it odd that Ann and David displayed so little emotion in the wake of Desiree's disappearance. In a curious move, Ann and David left their home a few days after the tragedy and went to a motel in Waco, saying they needed to get away from the volunteer searchers. These circumstances raised suspicions that perhaps something other than a simple lost child scenario had occurred. That said, it's important to note that many of these searchers appear to have believed they were responsible for Desiree's disappearance. Personally, I suspect Anne's odd behavior may have stemmed from the fact that she left her toddler in the care of a 5-year-old. Regardless if there was any criminal culpability to that act, leaving a 2-year-old in that sort of situation is highly questionable. Investigators pursued every theory they could think of to explain Desiree's vanishing. They determined that she may have simply gotten lost in the woods in the wilderness near her home, but if this was accurate, it was odd that no signs were found. Of course, they also investigated if she had been killed by her parents, but they weren't able to find any evidence of this either. Another theory they pursued was that she was secretly given away to another person to raise, since they didn't want the burden of dealing with her. Anne, burdened by grief and scrutiny that she may have been involved, turned to activism. Just weeks after her daughter vanished, she testified before the Texas legislature to urge better protections for children. Her emotional testimony helped prompt a new state law offering free fingerprinting of children, so that identifying records would be available if a child ever went missing. Personally, I suspect that she wouldn't have done this if she had actually been responsible for her daughter going missing. Decades have passed, but the mystery of what happened to Desiree Carroll endures. In 2018, Desiree's sister Heather passed away at age 40, and Heather's obituary listed Desiree as having predeceased her. Officially, Desiree is still a missing person, and her profile remains in law enforcement databases. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here with another reminder to hit subscribe and the notification bell if you're appreciating my content. Also, don't forget to check out the Patreon and the YouTube membership if you want to take your support up to the next level. Tara Grinstead was a 30-year-old high school history teacher and former beauty queen living in the small town of Ocilla, Georgia. She taught 11th grade history at Irwin County High School and was known for her vibrant personality and dedication to her students. During her college years, Tara had been active in pageants, and she won a local Miss Tifton title and even competed for Miss Georgia, using scholarship winnings to help pay for school. By 2005, she was a beloved figure in Ocilla's community and served as a mentor for young women on a similar life path that she had taken. Unfortunately, this beloved local teacher's life was about to be cut tragically short. On Saturday, October 22nd, 2005, Tara spent the day involved in the beauty pageant world she loved. She helped a friend prepare contestants for the local Miss Sweet Potato pageant and attended the event that evening as a coach and supporter. After the pageant, She visited a friend's house and then went to a neighbor's cookout, socializing into the night. Witnesses later recalled that around 11 p.m., Tara was walked to her car by a friend after the cookout, and she then headed home to her nearby house by herself. That weekend, Tara failed to return phone calls, and an acquaintance, a local police captain, reportedly tried to reach her multiple times on Sunday without success. However, it wasn't until Monday that her friends and family realized that something had gone terribly wrong. On the morning of Monday, October 24th, Tara did not show up for work at the high school, and her unexplained absence immediately alarmed her co-workers. Concerned colleagues contacted the authorities to do a welfare check at her home. Police arrived at Tara Grinstead's residence later that day and found an eerie scene. Her car was parked in the driveway, and inside the house they discovered Tara's cell phone and an unlocked door, but there was no sign of Tara herself. Oddly, her purse and keys were missing, suggesting she had left the house with those personal items and had not returned. Investigators noted there were no obvious signs of forced entry into the home, and no indications of a struggle such as broken furniture or blood evidence. The scene was essentially undisturbed, apart from the mystery of Tara's disappearance. Given these suspicious circumstances, local police immediately called upon the Georgia Bureau of Investigation to take the lead. As the GBI took charge, a massive search effort unfolded in Ocilla and the surrounding areas. Law enforcement and volunteers from the community mobilized quickly. They canvassed neighborhoods, distributed flyers, put up billboards, and organized ground searches in hopes of finding any trace of Tara. Despite these efforts, days and then weeks passed with no significant leads. Early on, investigators did recover one potentially crucial piece of evidence just outside Tara's home: a latex glove lying in her yard. Forensic testing revealed the glove bore DNA from an unknown male, raising the strong possibility that Tara had encountered someone the night she went missing. However, this clue led to frustration rather than a quick solution, as the DNA didn't match any of the dozens of men investigators tested. The glove's origin remained a mystery, suggesting the presence of an unidentified man at Tara's house, but giving no further leads to pursue. With physical evidence scarce, the early investigation had to explore every conceivable angle. Detectives conducted interviews with people in Tara's life and checked her phone records and computer for hints. In the absence of quick answers, numerous theories and suspects were scrutinized during those early years. One focus of suspicion was Tara's ex-boyfriend, Marcus Harper, a former Ocilla police officer and Army Ranger. Their long relationship had ended not long before Tara disappeared, and some wondered if a jealous rage or dispute might explain her fate. Harper was thoroughly investigated by authorities and was fully cooperative throughout. He voluntarily provided DNA samples, allowed searches of his vehicle, and fully accounted for his whereabouts on the night in question. His alibi checked out, and his DNA didn't match the glove, leading police to conclude Harper wasn't involved. Another individual examined was Anthony Vickers, a former student of Tara's. Earlier in 2005, Vickers had caused a disturbance outside Tara's home, an incident that resulted in his arrest for disorderly conduct. Given that prior incident, investigators interviewed him regarding the disappearance, but they found no evidence tying Vickers to it and didn't consider him a suspect in Tara's case. With those close to Tara seemingly cleared, some theories speculated that she might have fallen victim to a stranger abduction or a crime of opportunity. After over a decade of frustration, a major break in the case finally arrived in 2017. The catalyst was an unexpected tip, preceded by a resurgence of public interest. In 2016, a podcast called Up and Vanished devoted its first season to Tara's disappearance, bringing new attention to the long-dormant mystery. Not long after the podcast aired, a young woman came forward to the GBI with crucial information. This woman, Brooke Sheridan, was the girlfriend of Bo Dukes, a former friend and classmate of a man named Ryan Duke. Both men had been students at Irwin County High when Tara taught there years before. She told investigators that, after the increased publicity on the case brought on by the podcast, Bo Dukes had confessed to her that he knew what happened to Tara. Acting on this tip, authorities re-interviewed those involved and soon made a stunning announcement. On February 23, 2017, they arrested Ryan Duke and charged him with the slaying of Tara Grinstead. Days later, Bo Dukes was also arrested, accused of helping conceal the crime and tampering with evidence. According to GBI investigators, Ryan Duke, who was 21 at the time of the crime, had allegedly broken into Tara's house in the late hours of October 22, 2005. They believe Tara caught him in the act, leading Duke to fatally attack her. After slaying her, Duke reportedly removed her body from the home. It was then, investigators say, that he enlisted the help of his friend Bo Dukes to dispose of the remains. Dukes, whose family owned a large farm in a neighboring county, later admitted that he assisted Ryan in hiding Tara's body. The two men allegedly took Tara's remains to a remote corner of the Dukes family orchard and burned them to destroy evidence of the crime. This chilling revelation explained why exhaustive searches had never found Tara's body. Investigators even conducted a multi-day excavation of the orchard land in 2017 after the arrests, but they turned up no identifiable remains. The arrests of Ryan Duke and Bo Dukes, nearly 12 years after Tara Grinstead vanished, marked an extraordinary breakthrough. At long last, law enforcement announced that the mystery of Tara's disappearance had been solved, pending final confirmation in court. Now, with both suspects in custody, the focus turned to the legal system to deliver justice for Tara, and you're never going to believe what happened next. In the years following the 2017 arrests, the cases against the two men moved through the courts separately. Bo Dukes was the first to face trial. In March 2019, a jury convicted Dukes on charges related to covering up Tara's death. He was sentenced to the maximum of 25 years in prison for these offenses. Disturbingly, it was also revealed that he was a serial predator, committing multiple essay offenses against women in the intervening years. Ryan Duke, the alleged perpetrator himself, went to trial 3 years later in May 2022. The courtroom proceedings were dramatic. Although Ryan had initially confessed to the GBI, he recanted that confession and claimed it was actually Bo Dukes who was responsible. He now asserted that he had only helped destroy the evidence of the crime out of fear of Dukes. After a closely watched trial nearly 17 years after the crime, the jury delivered a split verdict. Ryan Duke was acquitted of Tara's slaying, as well as related charges of burglary and aggravated assault. This means the jury wasn't convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that he was the one who had ended her. However, the jury did find him guilty of the charge of concealing a death, reflecting his admitted involvement in the cover-up. A judge subsequently sentenced Ryan Duke to 10 years in prison for concealing Tara's death, the maximum penalty for that crime. Rico Harris was a 37-year-old former basketball prospect who once played for the Harlem Globetrotters. He disappeared in October 2014 during a solo drive from his mother's home in Southern California en route to Seattle. A few days after he left, Harris's black Nissan Maxima was found abandoned at a park in rural Yolo County, north of Sacramento, with no sign of Harris himself. Despite an intensive search of the surrounding wilderness by authorities, not a single trace of the 6'9", 300-pound athlete was found. Rico grew up in Los Angeles County and showed early promise as a basketball player. In his late teens, he blossomed into a high school standout, becoming one of the nation's top 100 recruits, courted by elite college programs like Connecticut, Kentucky, and UCLA. Unfortunately, Harris's path through college was tumultuous. He first enrolled at Arizona State University, but left after a freshman year arrest and academic issues. Harris then dominated at Los Angeles City College, leading the team to a state junior college championship in 1997. However, an attempt to transfer to a Division I program fell through due to a poor academic record. He finished his college career at Cal State Northridge, but his time there was marked by suspensions and conflicts with his coach. By 1999, perhaps unsurprisingly, the once promising player went undrafted in the NBA. Harris continued to pursue professional basketball on the fringe. In 2000, Rico joined the world-famous Harlem Globetrotters in hopes that this would raise his profile and he could move to a more legitimate basketball team. For those who aren't aware, the Globetrotters are a sports entertainment team rather than a competitive basketball team. His tenure with the Globetrotters lasted only a couple of months. He later said he left due to a combination of a nagging back injury and a serious concussion from being hit in the head with a baseball bat while trying to break up a fight. With that, Harris's basketball ambitions were effectively cut short, aside from a few attempts to play in a short-lived semi-pro league called the International Basketball League. Life after basketball proved challenging, and Harris fell into substance abuse, with alcohol being his most major issue. He would struggle off and on, but by 2007 he committed to sobriety and pieced his life back together, finding steady work in private security in Los Angeles. In 2012, while working as a security manager at a nightclub, Harris met Jennifer Song, an insurance broker from Seattle who was visiting California. The two began a long-distance relationship. For over 2 years, they maintained their bond through phone calls, text messages, and weekend visits. By 2014, Harris was looking toward the future with newfound optimism. He was nearing 7 years of sobriety and decided to relocate to Seattle to live with Jennifer permanently. He gradually moved his belongings into her Seattle townhouse and also secured a promising job interview in the area. This transition was not without difficulty, and Harris initially felt homesick and under pressure, and in late July 2014, he briefly relapsed into his old drinking habits. By early October 2014, Harris was still committed to his move and his new life in Seattle, or at least that's what he wanted people to believe outwardly. In the first week of October 2014, Rico Harris decided to make an impromptu trip from Seattle down to Alhambra in California to visit his family before fully settling in Seattle. According to Jennifer, he felt he needed to talk with his mother and brother, possibly to find closure with some past issues and to reassure his family about his new path. On October 8, 2014, Harris told Jennifer he was going out to explore Seattle while she went to the gym. Instead, he secretly began the 1,000-mile drive south to see his family. He drove through the night and arrived at his mother Margaret Fernandez's home in Alhambra around 2 o'clock in the morning on October 9th. Margaret was surprised and concerned by her son's sudden visit, and she later said she suspected he had been drinking when he showed up. Shortly after midnight, in the early hours of October 10th, 2014, Rico Harris quietly slipped out of his mother's house and began the long drive back to Seattle. At about 1 a.m., he phoned his mother, who hadn't even realized he had left. He then called Jennifer to let her know he was already on the road north. Jennifer was startled that he had left without sleeping, and the two spoke by phone for approximately 3 to 4 hours as Harris drove through Central California. Jennifer later said she grew increasingly concerned during that call, and his speech and thoughts were giving her cause for worry. Eventually, sometime before dawn, Jennifer fell asleep while on the phone with him. Around 8 o'clock in the morning on October 10th, Jennifer awoke and called Harris back, and he reported that he was near Sacramento. Not long after, at 10:45 that same morning, Harris left a voicemail for Jennifer saying that he was, quote, going up into the mountains to rest for a while, before continuing the drive. He mentioned that he hadn't slept much and needed to pull over. Approximately 30 minutes later, around 11:15 a.m., his cell phone was switched off, but whether Harris turned it off or the battery died is not clear. This was the last anyone ever heard from him, though panic didn't immediately set in. By October 13th, however, Harris had missed his important job interview in Seattle and still hadn't contacted anyone. That same day, far to the north in Yolo County, California, a sheriff's deputy was making a routine patrol through a secluded rest area known as Cache Creek Regional Park. The deputy noticed a black Nissan Maxima parked off to the side of the lot. It had been there the day before as well, which struck him as odd. On October 13th, after seeing the car again untouched, the deputy ran the license plates and discovered it was registered to Rico Harris. He contacted the Alhambra Police Department in Los Angeles County to inquire about the owner. Alhambra Police, in turn, went to Margaret Fernandez's house that day to inform her that Rico's car had been found abandoned hundreds of miles away in Northern California. Margaret immediately realized something was very wrong and filed a missing person report for her son on October 13th, 2014, officially launching the investigation into his disappearance. In the days following the car's discovery, a few tantalizing clues emerged. Investigators learned that Harris had stopped for gas in Lodi, California, around 100 miles south of where his car was found, and then apparently deviated from the main interstate. Why he drove into the isolated Cache Creek area remains uncertain. He may have taken a wrong turn or intentionally driven into the hills to rest or sightsee. Several witnesses later reported seeing a large African-American man fitting Harris's description in the vicinity on October 11th and 12th. One passerby recalled a tall man walking along Route 16 in the early morning hours of October 11th. Another motorist believed he saw the same man sitting on a guardrail overlooking Cache Creek around that time. Additionally, a couple reported seeing a giant man wandering around a black car on October 12th, appearing disoriented. These sightings suggested that Harris was indeed alive and on foot in the area for at least a day or two after he left the highway. Search teams discovered very large shoe prints by the creek near the parking lot, including one set of fresh impressions that matched the size 18 sneakers Harris wore. They noted that the prints went down toward the water and then back up, as if someone had walked to the creek and returned. In the same vicinity, investigators found an insert from a shoe believed to be from Harris's footwear based upon the size alone. This indicated that Harris had likely been the person who parked the car there and had walked around the area. About 1,500 feet up the road from the parking lot, searchers also recovered Harris's black backpack, abandoned on the roadside. Inside it were jumper cables, some clothing, and 2 plastic bottles, one empty and one partially filled with hard liquor. Crucially, the backpack also contained Harris's cell phone and charger. On October 18th, another sighting of Rico was reported, and the authorities found fresh footprints, again from size 18 shoes. Yet despite these leads, searchers couldn't locate Harris. Sniffer dogs were brought in and signaled interest in a particular spot along the creek, prompting dive teams to search pools of water, but no evidence was found. In the absence of concrete answers, several theories have been put forward to explain what might have happened to Rico Harris. The lead detective on the case eventually came to believe that no foul play was involved, and that Harris may have voluntarily walked away from his life. The investigation found no evidence of struggle or violence at the scene. The car, the phone, and the backpack all appeared to have been left undisturbed by anyone other than Harris himself. The lead detective theorized that Harris might have taken a wrong turn off the highway, and upon finding the serene Cache Creek area, decided to stop and rest. It was noted that he had been under significant pressure. He was moving to a new city, potentially starting a new job, and struggling to maintain sobriety. Further, he was in the process of adjusting to living with his girlfriend. The authorities officially speculated that the weight of those unresolved personal issues and life changes may have led to Harris not returning to Seattle. Interestingly, the lead detective has gone on record saying that he believes that sometime after Rico's car was towed, Rico may have gotten a ride out of the area. A related theory has focused on Harris's psychological state. By all accounts, he was under severe stress. Lack of sleep, the cross-country move, and his recent relapse might have created a perfect storm. It's possible Harris experienced a mental health crisis or emotional breakdown in the hours leading up to his disappearance. If Harris became disoriented or suffered some kind of break, he might have intentionally walked away into a new life or inadvertently placed himself in danger. Some believe that he may have entered into a dissociative fugue and started a new life, either being unaware of his old identity or simply preferring his new life. That said, others have observed that his physical appearance would likely make it harder for him to start fresh, since he literally stands head and shoulders above everyone else. Another possibility is that Rico Harris intended to return to his journey after resting, but fell victim to an accident in the remote wilderness. Harris may have been exhausted and possibly dehydrated, and as suggested by the bottles in his backpack, he had relapsed once again. It's conceivable that while walking around in a fatigued state, he could have slipped and injured himself or gotten lost in the wild. A fall down a ravine or into the fast-moving creek could prove fatal. If he succumbed to exposure or injury, his remains might have been missed in the initial search, especially if they ended up in a concealed spot or were moved by natural elements. From the start, investigators didn't see obvious signs of foul play in Harris's case. There was no blood and no indication of a struggle at the car. Further yet, Harris was, to put it mildly, not an easy target, standing 6'9" and with a powerful build. That said, his friends and family knew him to be a mild-mannered individual who got along with everyone, and suspect that he may have let his guard down around the wrong people. Take yourself on a mental journey to the vast, empty expanse of the Pacific Ocean in the early 19th century. There we'll meet a creature that would launch a nearly 30-year conflict against humanity, directly inspire one of the greatest novels ever written, and give whales soul in the human mind. But for the crew of a whaling ship, this was a world of immense loneliness and ever-present danger, a place where voyages could stretch for years. The line between survival and oblivion was perilously thin at times. The closest humans not on your ship were hundreds to thousands of miles away. In this isolated world, stories were currency, cautionary tales, as a way to map the psychological terrain of their brutal profession. Sailors rounding the treacherous Cape Horn would exchange news and legends, but over time, one name began to surface more than any other. It wasn't the name of a captain or a ship, but of a whale. They called him Mocha Dick, the seaman slayer of the South Pacific. He was more than just an animal. He was a personality, a known adversary whose exploits were chronicled across the fleets. In an industry built on the anonymous slaughter of an intelligent creature viewed as a natural resource, the simple act of giving this one whale a name was a profound admission. It acknowledged that this creature was different, an individual force to be reckoned with. Mocha Dick was an old bull sperm whale of staggering proportions, a true leviathan. When he was finally slain and measured, his body stretched over 70 feet from head to tail, making him among the largest individual toothed whales to ever be documented. But it was his coloring, rather than his immense length and girth, that first seared him into the memories of sailors. He was described as being as white as wool, a spectral figure against the deep blue of the ocean. From a distance, a lookout might mistake him for a white cloud drifting on the horizon, or a snowdrift breaking the waves. This ghostly appearance, likely a result of albinism or simply extreme age, made him instantly recognizable. His uniqueness didn't end there. Unlike most sperm whales whose skin is relatively smooth, Mocha Dick's giant battering ram of a head was rugged and heavily encrusted with a thick layer of barnacles. This gave him a gnarled, fearsome appearance, as if he wore a kind of natural god-tier armor forged over decades of battle. Even the way he breathed was distinct. A typical sperm whale spouts at an angle, with a short, puffing noise. Mocha Dick, however, was said to spray water in a powerful, continuous, and vertical column, a blast accompanied by a steady roar that sounded to sailors like a freight train. And in an effort to make sure my video isn't demonetized, I'm going to refrain from making the obvious joke here. I'll let you guys fill that hole in the comments. These features, his color, his armored head, his thundering spout, created an unmistakable profile. When whalers saw him, they knew exactly who they were facing. Yet, for all his intimidating features, Mocha Dick possessed a remarkably complex temperament. Accounts from multiple sources agree on a crucial point. When sailors treated him with respect, he was surprisingly docile. He was known to swim peacefully alongside ships, a gentle giant moving with lazy grace among the very boats designed for his destruction. This peaceful nature, however, was a thin veil, and if seamen would try to blast him with a harpoon, this soft, gentle giant would harden with astonishing rapidity. Mocha Dick's career as the Pacific's most formidable defender wasn't a brief affair. His legend was built over a span of nearly 30 years. The first documented encounters and attacks occurred sometime before 1810, and he would continue to haunt the whaling grounds off the coast of Chile until his brutal end. Over these decades, he amassed a combat record that became the stuff of legend around tavern tables in Nantucket and across the whaling world. The numbers, while likely embellished through the natural process of sailors telling and retelling tall tales, speak to the scale of his reputation. Some accounts claim he was involved in over 100 separate skirmishes with whaling crews. He was credited with the destruction of at least 20 whaleboats, which are the smaller oar-powered crafts launched from the main ship. According to his legend, he ate up a truly remarkable amount of seamen in these encounters, with some figures citing as many as 30 sailors gobbled up. This figure is disputed by some modern historians as impossibly high given the records of the time. What is true, however, is that he was the veteran of countless battles over the decades, and until his last, he always won. His fame grew to the point that he became a fixture in the daily lives of whalers, and when ships would cross paths on sea routes, they would ask about any sightings. While most avoided the creature, for some ambitious whaling captains, an encounter with Mocha Dick was the ultimate test of skill and courage. These captains would intentionally sail their vessels near his home territory off Mocha Island, hoping for a chance to challenge the king of the Pacific. Over his course of combat with his challengers, he learned various techniques to get the best of the whalers. For instance, he would maneuver in a way so as to present his broad, powerful back to harpooners, ensuring his weaker parts weren't penetrated. The physical evidence of his one whale crusade against these men was etched into his very body. He was said to trail 50 to 100 yards of multiple old harpoon line from his back, the tattered remnants of past victories. Now let me just get into the whaling industry and whales themselves here for a moment. The 19th century whaling industry wasn't a small-scale operation. It was a global economic engine and essentially the energy sector of its day. Before the discovery of petroleum in 1859, the modern world ran on whale oil. It was the fuel that lit the lamps of burgeoning cities from London to New York, and the lubricant that greased the gears and machinery of the Industrial Revolution. At its peak in the mid-1840s, the American whaling fleet alone numbered over 700 vessels, making the industry a cornerstone of the young nation's economy. Whaling voyages were monumental undertakings. A ship might be at sea for up to 4 years at a time, pushing into the most remote and uncharted corners of the globe in pursuit of its quarry. This immense globe-spanning network is what allowed the story of a single whale off the coast of South America to become a pervasive legend in New England. Ultimately, though, it was a dirty and inhumane business that ended up decimating the populations of some of the world's most majestic creatures. Sperm whales possess the largest brain of any animal, and they're highly intelligent, sociable animals that many scientists believe are completely self-aware. These animals have extremely strong family bonds and are believed to be able to actively think, much like a human. In this context, the story of Mocha Dick is likely more of a story of revenge than the whalers of the time realized. It's entirely possible that this great beast's family was slain, and he came to a conscious decision to crusade against whalers in particular. As evidence for this, Mocha Dick would come up next to vessels and swim along peacefully until he was attacked, at which point he would become a force of nature. While we can't know for sure, personally, I feel like as we have a greater understanding of whale intelligence, we may have a pretty firm answer on this one day. That said, I think his final encounter will prove that this whale was acting out of some sort of higher calling. After decades of victorious encounters, the life of Mocha Dick came to a dramatic and tragic end in 1838. The story of his final battle was immortalized in an 1839 article by the American writer and explorer Jeremiah Reynolds. According to Reynolds' account, the conflict didn't begin with an attack on Mocha Dick himself. Instead, the whalers had targeted a female sperm whale and had just succeeded in slaying her calf. As the mother whale grieved over her whale child, Mocha Dick appeared. In what was described as an act of selfless intervention, the old warrior charged into the fray, not to save himself, but to defend the distraught mother. This single detail reframed the entire narrative for the 19th century audience. His final act wasn't one of instinctive aggression, but of apparent compassion and altruism. He attacked the whaleboats with his customary fury, but this time, his heroism was his undoing. The battle was fierce. Reynolds' narrative paints a vivid picture of the chaos. The massive white whale charging, the small boat being tossed on the waves, the hiss of the harpoon finding its mark, and the line smoking as Mocha was about to take them to the abyss. This time, however, there would be no escape, and Mocha Dick's power faded. Mortally wounded, the great whale entered his death throes. He thrashed his enormous flukes, turning the sea into what Reynolds described as a, quote, whirlpool of bloody foam. Then, with one final convulsive effort to twist free, he turned slowly onto his side and lay still, a dead mass upon the ocean he had ruled for so long. When the whalers brought the massive carcass alongside their ship, the scale of their victory became clear. At over 70 feet, he was one of the largest whales they had ever seen, and he yielded an astonishing 100 barrels of oil, double the amount of a usual bull. And as they stripped this whale emperor of his blubber, they found the final silent testament to his life of struggle. There were 19 rusted harpoon heads that he had carried with him for years, the scars of his crusade against the whaling industry. While no one knew it at the time, Mocha Dick's passing was the beginning of his immortality. In May 1839, Jeremiah Reynolds published his dramatic account of the whale's life in a popular New York publication, the Knickerbocker Magazine. Among the readers of that magazine was a young man named Herman Melville. Reynolds's article planted a seed in Melville's imagination, providing him with the core concept for the antagonist of what would become his masterpiece. It's a crucial point of history that Melville's novel, Moby Dick, wasn't inspired by a single event, but was a masterful synthesis of two separate true stories. The first was the tale of Mocha Dick. From Reynolds's article, Melville took the character of his great white whale. However, for all his ferocity, there were no credible accounts of Mocha Dick ever sinking a large three-masted whaling ship, only the smaller whaling boats. For that plot point, Melville turned to a different, equally true, and even more horrifying event: the 1820 sinking of the whale ship Essex. The Essex, out of Nantucket, was rammed and sunk in the middle of the Pacific by an enormous enraged whale, leaving its surviving crew to turn one member into an item on the menu. The world that created Mocha Dick is gone, and in perhaps one of the most bizarre twists of history, this whale won his final victory against humanity. Though Moby Dick wasn't born from an activist's pen, it became one of the most powerful literary sparks for modern anti-whaling sentiment. When Herman Melville released his novel in 1851, he was dissecting humanity's arrogance toward nature. Captain Ahab's relentless hunt for the white whale was an allegory for mankind's doomed crusade to dominate the natural world. For the first time, readers were forced to see the whale not as oil and bone, but as an intelligent, mysterious being, a thinking adversary rather than a resource. In a century that glorified whaling as industry and adventure, Moby Dick quietly planted the seed of moral doubt. Its visceral depictions of the realities of the trade made whaling feel less heroic and more horrific. Ishmael's awe toward the whale's majesty contrasted with Ahab's madness, suggesting that reverence, not conquest, was the truer path. This inversion of values anticipated the ecological awakening that would come a century later. So while Melville certainly didn't attend any whale conservation meetings, his novel did something greater. It gave whales souls in the human imagination. Without that transformation, campaigns to, quote, save the whales might never have resonated as deeply. Moby Dick turned a beast into a symbol, and a symbol into a movement. Without Mocha Dick's unrelenting conflict against whalers, Moby Dick would have never been written, and our world would be completely different today.